Hey everyone, it's Sleepy Reader, aka burping, aka Damien. This is my first comic book thoughts in a long time that is not a countdown video. It's just my comic book reading diary, plain and simple. As you may know from previous videos, if you've watched them, I canceled my pull list at my comic book shop. I'm not on the whole getting new comics, and I'm focusing on reading just all the different comics I've been picking up after the past few years and haven't been getting around to reading trades and comics. But this week I read a bunch of single issues, a couple on digital with my daughter, but most physically. So I have 11 comics here physically. I also read, with my daughter, I read 3 issues of Justice League Incarnate, which is a pretty current series, I think. Part of some larger event, I guess. We couldn't really understand it, but we were just looking. My daughter gets a big kick out of the really silly attempts at really cosmic comics from Marvel and DC, and this one certainly fit the bill, with lots of traveling between universes and stuff. I'm gonna quickly go through everything I read and then take a deeper dive. We'll see if I keep doing it this way or not, but that's how I'm doing it today. But I don't think I'll bother with a deeper dive on the Justice League Incarnate. Maybe I'm flashing a few images up on the screen or something. It was written by Joshua Williamson, who I know can do much better than what he did there, but I suppose it was fun enough. Lots and lots of superheroes, many that you never heard of from the different universes. And just lots of excuses to kind of extend the storyline, make them go from another universe to another universe and not resolve the conflict in these 3 issues, where at many points where it seemed like they were about to resolve the conflict. And then there'd be no more series, I guess. So pretty much space filler, but entertaining enough to me and my daughter when we're in the mood before bedtime. And then I had picked up a while ago 2 issues of Herbie. This is a reprint series from Dark Horse Comics with new covers and 1 new story by John Byrne. And I was super charmed by these. Not so much by the John Byrne story, actually, but by the Ogden Whitney drawn stuff from back in the 50s. So I'm looking forward to taking a deeper dive into these with you. It had a very peculiar sense of humor, which took me a bit of a while to get into. But once I did, I really enjoyed it a lot. So I'm going to have to seek out more Herbie, whether I look for that in like archive editions. I think at some point Dark Horse put out archive editions, or go hunt up the original Harvey comics that they appeared in. That's tempting to do it that way, actually, but that would take a lot of time. And then I guess I'm doing a read through of Astonishing Tales from Marvel circa 1970. So I read the first 2 issues of that. 2 little stories in each, a Kazar and a Doctor Doom. The Kazars on the insides were drawn by Jack Kirby. 1 quote written by Stan Lee and 1 written by Roy Thomas. The one written by Roy Thomas felt a little more Roy Thomas-y. This is, I think, right when Jack Kirby was leaving Marvel, and I don't think he was putting as much. The art looks really nice, but since he really was the person who came up with the plots, I don't think he was putting the effort into that. He was saving that for the New Gods and the Fourth World and such. But then at the back of the book is a fantastic, at least in these 2 issues, Wally Wood drawn, Roy Thomas scripted series about Doctor Doom fighting off against the rebels who are trying to take back Latveria. And by the 2nd issue, the plot gets wonderfully complex, and I really enjoyed that. And in the Kazar mode, I kind of randomly read Kazar issue 6. It was near the top of some pile because I'd recently bought a piece of artwork that came from this issue, and that was interesting. And the art in here is beautiful. It's by Buscema and Alfredo Alcala. The script is by Jerry Conway, and it feels like a very competent Conan type of fantasy story, even though it's set in the Savage Land. And then jumping back to Kirby, I read issue 2 of Kamandi. I also skimmed issue 1. So I'll put a link below. We had a Kamandi discussion on Naman's channel on A Comic Bookworm. Me, Naman, and Metarog, the old guys, talking about our love for Kamandi. But actually, a big part of that was a very interesting discussion that Naman initiated, discussing where did the idea of Kamandi come from? Was it strictly a ripoff of Planet of the Apes? And the short answer is no, because Kirby had done some earlier work before even the novel of Planet of the Apes was published that resembles, seems like proto-germination of the idea of Kamandi. This issue 2 is not as brilliant as issue 1, and in my memory of Kamandi in general, this is not a standout issue, but actually it had all kinds of incredible scenes, and the creepy rats, which also ties in to that old story that Jack Kirby did in 1957, because the rats were the major bad guy in that. But he's elevated the complexity of the rats' world and Kamandi's world, the whole world here, obviously far more visually complex than what he was doing in 1957. Kirby at his peak artistically. So we'll definitely take a long dive into this. And I'm looking forward to reading more issues. I'm debating with myself, do I read all 40 Kamandi issues in a row now? Because soon, well, in a few weeks, I think, we'll get that same gang back together and talk about our favorite Kamandi stories. And if I'm just going on memories from childhood, I would pick, I think it's issue 7, is it 6 or 7? The one with Kamandi and Flower tied up on the cover. But I would like to refresh my memory. And I have read I've never read Kamandi from 1 to 40, all the Kirby issues in a row. I've always read them in a spotty kind of way. So, but in this whole thing, in this first week of just focusing on my back issues, I have enjoyed reading in a spotty kind of way. There's something somehow to me pleasurable, probably because that's how I started in comics, of picking up an issue here, an issue there. And so in that flavor, I want to read more DC Comics Presents. I got kind of a kick out of it. So I read issue 79 and issue 37. And issue 37 stands out because it is plotted and drawn by Jim Starlin. And looking at things, I realized that Starlin did a number of DC Comics Presents and a smattering of other stuff at DC circa about 1980. Like he did some backup stories in Warlord and maybe a little bit of Legion of Superheroes and stuff before he bounced back to Marvel. But it seems, at least in these DC Comics Presents, they maybe didn't trust him to do the writing, so he got to do the plotting but not the scripting. Which is crazy because he proved himself so well at Marvel with some of their most memorable books in Warlock and Captain Marvel. So it seems a step down not to let him write at DC. Both of these books, I realize, are Julius Schwartz books. And so this ties into reading another a Christmas-themed DC Comics Presents, which I have been meaning to mention but never did, that I did a Christmas, so I'm going to put a link down below for that too. I did a guest appearance on a podcast, and now I'm blanking on the name of the podcast. It's with Ron, and it's a really good podcast, a fantastic comics podcast, I think it's called, something along those lines. I'll put the name on the screen, I guess. Anyway, we talked about an issue of DC Comics Presents from like 1984 83, 84, that still read like it was 1970. It was fun. And so anyway, DC Comics presents, even though in the 80s much of DC had progressed, I suspect things still edited by Julius Schwartz had that old-time feel. And so even though there are touches of Jim Starlin in here, a lot of it feels like Julius Schwartz. And this one from even later in the run, from March 85, still feels like it could have been 1969, 1970 Superman story. A lot of fun, drawn by Kurt Swan. So we'll look at those when we get back into the deep dive. Okay, I did read one modern comic. I mean, I do have a backlog of modern comics that I want to get to, and trades of modern comics. But I never finished reading issue 3 of Agent of World when it came out a month or two ago, I think. And I now realize, now that I have finished it, it's because I didn't understand. I picked up page number 1, and I had no idea what was going on. Really interesting art in here. Totally confusing attempt at a surreal story, and just not followable. Maybe if I remembered what happened in issue 2, it would make more sense, but I don't think so. There's only one more issue, so I might sneak into my... I did enjoy the first 2 issues. I might sneak into a shop and buy the 4th issue. We'll see what my mood is on that. And then, so that one was, I mean, at least it had kind of cool art. Then there was Strange Tales, the Golem, featuring the Golem. And I was real excited by this, 70s Marvel horror kind of comic. Horror mixed in with a superhero Marvel technique is the way they approached their horror in the 70s, which was kind of cool. And art by John Buscema and Jim Mooney. But really, on most pages, you couldn't even tell it was John Buscema. Something was off with this comic. And on top of that, was it Len Wein? Len Wein was just sort of treading water or sleepwalking through this script. And I'm not sure. I know that Len Wein has done a lot of important stuff in comics history. As a kid, he was not one of the writers I got excited about. My first favorite writer was probably Roy Thomas, because he wrote the first comic I ever read, then Stan Lee, and then Steve Englehart, and eventually Doug Moench and stuff. Jerry Conway and Len Wein, in my memory, were just okay. And judging from, if we're just judging from this one comic, Len Wein was less than okay. Okay, and then the oddest thing I read this week, something I just stumbled upon in a comic shop, but I now realize Loading the Cannon may definitely mention this creator to me, and he may or may not have mentioned this specific comic. He publishes these treasury-size comics with Fantagraphics. This one's called Sir Alfred, and it says, where did that go? It says number 3, but it's not number 3. It's a standalone package of short comic strips based on moments in the life of Alfred Hitchcock. So I was really excited to find this, and it's drawn in the style of Little Lulu, and a very beautiful take on the Little Lulu style, both in the colors and the... well, we'll take a deeper dive into this too. But I'd say half of the strips in here had me scratching my head, maybe because it assumed more of a knowledge of Alfred Hitchcock. I've seen a lot of Alfred Hitchcock movies, but most of them a very long time ago. In terms of biographical details, I just know a few rumors here and there. But also, there was also just sort of some odd storytelling choices, you might say, in here too. Anyway, I'm glad I read it, but I think I had higher expectations for it. So I ended up judging it maybe kind of harshly. So we'll turn the camera around, and talk some more about these comics for those who want. As I said, Sir Alfred is a really nice package. It's treasury size and just, I don't know, a really nice package. I sort of fell in love with it in the store by just looking at the front cover, which is a famous line from Hitchcock that other people have copied about the heart of a small boy in a desk jar. I feel like Stephen King used that one a lot. And then a kind of a joke on Greta Garbo and famous slogans. But I don't know if this is made up by the cartoonist or an actual joke that Hitchcock himself made. It looks like most of this book is based on autobiographical research. And there's these little snippets of things from different moments in his life. There's this piece on his childhood. I don't know why it's called the MacGuffin, actually. MacGuffin is a famous term used by writers and movie makers and other people now that was made up by Alfred Hitchcock. But how this links up to this story of his childhood, I'm not sure, but you get interesting tidbits about his life and what might have shaped him. And you get a understanding of the fact that he came in when movies just were beginning. So his career spanned up till his death, the history of movies in a sense, which was really cool. So these are different anecdotes from different movies, like this one where he's kind of playing with a moment with the scriptwriter. Who the scriptwriter is, I don't know. We got this one in the middle, a giant spread, very cool. And later, let's see if I can find it. Later we get, a whole bunch of just different moments from behind the scenes of different movies. Some of which I understood what was going on, some of which I did not have the context for. The easiest way for me to give an example of how there's something in the way this artist, who I guess is Hensley, there's not a lot of crediting going on. I think there's a copyright by someone named Hensley somewhere in here. So copyright by Tim Hensley on MGM lot number 3. But here we get a sort of slightly disjointed record of how Alma, his wife-to-be, kind of teamed up with him on producing movies early on, and their misadventures, where things kept going wrong on the movie set. And it skips very quickly from event to event. But then the strip ends with her doing a cooking show or a mock cooking show, and I just don't know. I have no idea what that means and how it connects to what eventually happened to her in her relationship with Alfred Hitchcock. Shows her at the typewriter. She's in the kitchen. She's suddenly at the typewriter in the kitchen. She's doing movie editing. She's back in the kitchen and says, "I never was terribly ambitious." I don't know. It's just hard to, without having a deep knowledge of everything in Alfred Hitchcock's life, it's hard to process some of these kinds of things. But most of it just comes down to, you wish you knew a little more of the context in about half of these incidences. But I don't know. It's really cool, and I probably will look for other comics by this guy when I'm in the mood to spend money. Tim Hensley, I think he's done at least a few more for Fantagraphics. The list price was $20 complete, which, it wasn't a bargain, but was a reasonable price for what you got, I think. So the Golem, like I said, I was super psyched to just read some cheesy Marvel in the 70s horror. I think there were 3 issues somewhere with the Golem appearing, and this would be the first one. And so it kind of had someone searching for the golem on an archaeological dig, and then they run afoul of some soldiers who are out in the desert, who turn out to not be quite. They turn out to be the worst kind of soldiers. Let's say. I don't want to. Well, it's a really old comic book. The soldiers, plus it's not a good one. Soldiers turn out to be deserters from the army, so they're basically like sand pirates, or whatever. They'll do anything, take anything for what they want, and so the golem comes to life from the blood or the tears of the old professor. I think it's his tears. I think isn't the normal golem myth that you make this statue and then you put some special Hebrew letters in his mouth and he comes to life? I don't know. Anyway, then of course he rips into these bad deserter soldiers, and there's something familiar about him. I presume he has the professor, who is also her father's soul, inside of him, perhaps. And we were promised the Black Crossing next. I'm not sure if the story did continue in Strange Tales or if it continued elsewhere. But so the story's kind of flat. And then the weird thing is it says it's illustrated by John Buscema and inked by Jim Mooney. But I would guess there are, like that figure right there has kind of a John Buscema look. But there's a lot of stuff. It seems like maybe John Buscema did some hasty sketches on a bad day. There's a lot of stuff here that does not look like John Buscema and just looks like Jim Mooney. And I have often liked Jim Mooney, but it just feels... However this team-up occurred, it just feels like they were going through the paces, and it was thrown together very quickly, I'm guessing. So it was less than exciting art, but it was more the story. If the story had really clicked with me, it would have been better. Well, we're looking at the ones I didn't like so much. Agent of World, I just couldn't make heads or tails of the script at all. There was these repeating motifs, but I didn't know who they were happening to or why or where we were. We're inside someone's head, maybe, and someone's repeating the same day over and over again, I guess. The art is kind of cool and grotesque. I don't know. Jason Wordie is usually a colorist I like a lot, but I don't know if the colors serve this art as well as they could, or serve this story. So I'm sure there's other readers out there who made more of this than I did. I know this is a favorite book of one of my favorite YouTube reviewers. So anyway, and I wonder if this series has been doing well, that it will come back after the initial 4 issues. And it's something I'll keep an eye on, or keep an eye out for, as I move back into new comics at some point. Let's see, what else have I got here? So my biggest surprise of my week of reading, and there were a number of surprises, but was reading Herbie, this Dark Horse comic, which I pondered for a while about whether, other than the John Byrne cover and the John Byrne story, whether it was new work, because it was all copyrighted like 1989. So whoever, or 1992. So whoever held the copyright managed to renew it, I guess, when Dark Horse picked up Herbie. They were going to do, I think, 12 issues of this, but only 2 came out. And then they did put out some archives, I understand. So those pages I just flipped through are the John Byrne story, which I guess is supposed to be a joke on 50s sexism, but it just didn't click right for me. Basically, the mom gets a job doing commercials, and it's a crisis for the dad because then he has to do housework. So Herbie goes on a mission to cause her to lose her job and come back and do the housework. So the nice 1950s or early 1960s home setup where the men relax and the woman does all the work. is returned to. There's nothing like that in the rest of the stories in here, which are all reprints, I guess, from either the late 50s or the early 60s. There's a perfectly good story where Herbie goes to be trained to be a superhero, but because I don't know much about Herbie, I thought this was maybe an origin story. Later I learned, no, he has plenty of adventures where he doesn't dress up as a superhero, but he still has amazing superpowers. But the story that in this first issue, it's the last story, is what really made Herbie click for me. Herbie and Professor Flipdome's screwy machine. So his next door neighbor is a mad inventor, basically, named Professor Flipdome. And he kidnaps Herbie's father and shrinks him down and sends him into a kind of microscopic world where there's supposedly doubles of every person in the world. There's a miniature double of them in the microscopic world. And Herbie goes to catch up with his dad, so he flies by walking through the air, meets up with his friend, Professor Flipstone, and learns what happened to his father and dives into the shrinking machine to go save his father. In this shrunken world, apparently there are, even though I think it's much smaller than that, there are turtles and plants. The turtle has a turtleneck, of course, and travels very fast after Herbie startles him. And then, of course, Herbie, puts on part of a bee. What does this sign say? It's the Bumbler's Chassis Shop. Replace your old chassis. So this is where I learned kind of anything can happen in kind of a surreal, humorous way with Herbie. He does meet his own double. I don't think we meet the father's double there. And saves his father from giant insects. His father all the time thinks it's Herbie's double who's saving him. And at the end of the story, tells Herbie, why can't you be like your double? But when his father was unshrunk, he got made too large. And the story just ends there with the wife trying to relax the husband. So the father always calls Herbie a fat nothing, and the father and possibly the mother are the only ones in the world who don't realize all the fantastic things Herbie can do. People seem to know Herbie all over the place. He can talk to animals. He has a time-traveling lollipop. So in this one, he goes back in time because he's made a friend with someone who has a museum of weapons, and that person badly needs the gun of Doc Holliday, the famous shotgun of Doc Holliday, to complete his collection. It's kind of an old school portrayal of Indians. If you can get past that, it's kind of humorous. Doc Holliday, there's Herbie. Herbie, of course, can defeat any of these guys in the Wild West without much violence, without hurting anyone. When he draws a lollipop gun. And eventually we discover that Doc Holliday is a dentist and a coward, not at all interested in violence. But Herbie hypnotizes him and fills his shotgun shells with gas, the dentist's knockout gas, and causes a non-violent solution to the shootout at the OK Corral. Gets his friend the gun, which means he can sell his gun museum for, what was it, $3 million to a random rich person, and everyone's happy. Except that Herbie's mother just thinks he's been sleeping all the time and doesn't do anything. And then Herbie goes to time travels to the time of George Washington to prove or disprove a theory about whether George Washington bit somebody that caused the Revolutionary War. And then it's up to Herbie to convince Washington to go ahead with the war, and then up to Herbie to do Paul Revere's Ride, and basically, in various ways, save the revolution. And Then go back to his own time and get punished for telling them that it was just Washington's teeth on their own that bit the royal commissioner. Another one with, I guess, a continuing character, a cave girl who looks exactly like Herbie and who wants to marry him. So anyway, I love this artwork. It works perfectly with this kind of deadpan yet surreal sense of humor. And I guess that's Ogden Whitney. And Shane O'Shea is a pseudonym for the actual writer, and I looked up his name, but now I've forgotten it. So I need more Herbie. Probably best read in individual stories, rather than shotgunning a whole bunch of stories, but really fun and really funny. Okay, we've got these two DC Comics Presents, and I somehow thought, I actually read them. I read the later one first, but that one, I think it was written by Paul Kupperberg, and the art was by my favorite old-time Superman artist, Kurt Swan, Al Williamson as the guest inker. And one thing leads to another, and there's two versions of Superman, and it's one of these old school Silver Age, early Bronze Age puzzles where Superman has to figure out what's going on and solve a puzzle, an utterly ridiculous puzzle, as you do. And it was a lot of fun to read. It just was a little startling because of the date from 1985, when DC had a lot more. I guess what I forget is DC kind of had a combination of moving forward into the 1980s, but retaining some books that, at least until the Crisis, were pretty much the way they'd always been. So, and then, I expected something much more radical with the Superman and Hawkgirl, given the team on here. Roy Thomas doing script and Jim Starlin plot and art. No inker, he does his own inking. Colors by Gene D'Angelo, and Costanza doing the letters. But it's very good art. It's way toned down from what Starlin was doing a few years before this, and I think way toned down from what Starlin later did, just maybe a year after this, when he was doing things in Epic and the Metamorphosis and the Death of Captain Marvel and all of that. There are some pages that are reminiscent of that kind of unique Starlin layouts, but most of them are pretty toned down, and the story itself is much more toned down, even though it was plotted by Starlin and written by Roy Thomas. So that's what leads me to think they were designing this story to please old school editor Julius Schwartz, and those old school DC editors just really controlled the game, controlled the nature of the story. So it contains a little interesting twist of discovering that some relative a few generations back from Krypton of Superman's came to Earth to do illegal experiments that weren't allowed on Krypton. And it could have opened up all kinds of interesting possibilities and things to learn, but instead the problem is solved and then erased. It's the although I suppose someone who wants to come in, and maybe someone did years later, and dig up this old laboratory of Superman's ancestor, but they say in the final panels that they're going to bury it, so that no one will ever see it. I did not read the backup story. The art didn't initially appeal to me, although I do want to find out more about Rip Hunter Time Master. Whatever will or did happen to Rip Hunter Time Master? And that sort of shades of whatever happened to the Man of Steel, which I think also was edited by Julius Schwartz, maybe, at the end of his run on Superman. Anyway, I should read that, and maybe I will. but forewarned that DC Presents is going to be very old school DC does make me want to read more DC Presents. I enjoy that. And interestingly enough, there is, I think, 5 or 6 issues that were drawn and plotted by Jim Starlin. So interesting to just see what's going on with all those. Kind of for me, a centerpiece of my reading this week was the 2 issues of Astonishing Tales I read. Looking at it, I think this is a Marie Severin cover. I didn't look it up online. I would even hazard a guess that it was inked by Sid Shores or someone like that. It's a pretty cool cover, but inside we get Jack Kirby, and as I said, right at the end of his time at Marvel, or his first time at Marvel. So the beginning of the Bronze Age, you might say, when Kirby left Marvel. And what I presume from what I know, that this was probably plotted by Jack Kirby, and I think there wasn't a lot of plotting done. I think he was pretty much through with Marvel, through with giving his good ideas to be credited to Stan Lee. So the whole comic is just a fight with Kraven, and where Kraven is kidnapping Zabu, the friend, the saber-toothed tiger friend of Kazar. And so it got a little bit boring. It was fun to look at all of this Jack Kirby art, and the inker did a good job. I think it was it Frank Giacoa? No, it was Sam Granger. I don't know a lot about Sam Granger. But anyway, he captured that 1970 style Kirby quite well. So, and the big treat was Unto You Is Born the Doomsman, and its follow-up story in the next issue. Drawn and inked by Wally Wood. No colorists were credited back then, but the color looks really good too. I wonder if it was Tatiana Wood, his wife. But anyway, and I don't know if Wally Wood was involved in the plotting or if it all came from Roy Thomas, but it's full of interesting elements and just fantastic art and so much story packed onto every page. All involves this fallen Prince Rudolph's, the fallen Prince of Latveria's attempt to regain the throne. At the same time, Doom is making some kind of artificial man that he is putting all of his brain power into, like a copy of his own brain is gone into that guy in the mummy clothing. And there's a beautiful girl who's a lookalike for some other girl that Doom was in love with, so she's part of the plot to overthrow him. And when the rebels come in, they've got all these crazy jet backpacks, and we learn in the next issue why they have cool gear. And during the fight where the rebels are defeated, at the same time this weird Frankenstein-like creature created by Doom escapes. And Rodolfo and the beautiful girl, I forget her name, are captives of Doom. I'm going to dive right in. We'll talk about the Kazar afterwards, but then the plot, I thought it would be less exciting, but the plot actually gets more exciting in the next issue, where Rodolfo turns out to be a robot, and Doom gives the girl a chance to try to kill him, and she can't do it. So I'm picturing a romance coming there between Doom and the girl. And the escaped android, as they now are calling him, is out creating havoc in Doom's kingdom. The art is just incredible. This is really good Wally Wood art, and the complication of the story just keeps coming. and there's really no, even though Doom is obviously evil, there's no clear good and evil, because Rodolfo is just a selfish would-be ruler himself, and then this mysterious character shows up, this guy in a bubble thing who's been supplying the technology and a lot of the schemes for the rebels. So I have to go back to my storage unit and dig up issue 3, hopefully Wally Wood stays on to complete this story. And it makes me think, compared to... people sometimes talk about Roy Thomas as being just a clone of Stan Lee, and that might be, but in some ways, by this point, the student had overtaken the master. Roy Thomas's script is far and away more exciting and interesting than anything Stan Lee is doing at this point in his career. And in fact, in the next issue of the next installment of the Kazar story, it is now scripted by Roy Thomas, art by Jack Kirby. Given that Jack and Stan started this story, because it's a complete continuation, I assume it's still basically plotted by Jack, but maybe Roy had some involvement in it. It gets a little more interesting. It's still mostly a fight with Kraven, but now it's a fight in a luxury hotel, and Kazar seems to be using his brain a little more. But the weird thing is, there's a few panels on this page that don't look like they were drawn by... That does not look like a Jack Kirby drawing. And I'm not sure about this one there. And then I think it's on the next page. Kraven's face doesn't look like it was drawn by Jack Kirby on some of these pictures. I'm not sure. Maybe it was just a hasty inking job, but I'm pretty sure that, and like this panel too, a few of these panels were drawn by someone else, and I'm dying to know why. What went wrong there that they had to change it? Maybe because of changes that Roy wanted to make to the plot or something. I don't know. But by the end of the issue, we get a new character showing up who makes things more interesting. And so I think this is perhaps stuff inserted by Roy to further plotting that he is interested in. And as I remember it, I don't know whether Kirby lasts one more issue, but pretty soon this story gets taken over by Barry Windsor Smith, who is at the point where he started to develop a really cool art style. So I'm looking forward to more of that too now. But the amazing one is the Doctor Doom story. Okay, I'm going to raise up my camera a little bit here. So that was, those Kirby Kazars was from 1970, and this is from 1974, I believe. Kazar has his own title. We're on the 6th issue. I don't know. I think he may have already also been appearing in Savage Tales at this point. And at least this issue features the art team that is so popular in Savage Sword of Conan, of John Buscema and Alfredo Alcala. Alfredo being the finisher, adding so much to John Buscema's great layouts. The detail is just amazing everywhere in an Alcala inked story, especially during this period. And it is a more Conan-like story where Kazar and Zabu find someone in need of rescue and get kind of involved in his life, I think because whatever, they feel some protectiveness over him being a boy. Kind of hard to tell what the way I guess he's a bit skinnier. But anyway, you can see the art is beautiful. And then they get sucked. The boy's brother is kind of a Captain Ahab who was wounded. He lost his arm and part of his face in an encounter with a giant water dinosaur. So now, years later, he's got a crew of people hired or I think his tribe, basically, that he kind of runs with an iron hand, to come help him get revenge on this creature. So it's very much Captain Ahab from Moby Dick, with Khazar inserted in the middle of it. And so as I was saying, the art is just incredible everywhere here, and it's a solid. I could see Conan more than Khazar in this situation, but I guess the question is, what is Khazar's personality? And maybe it was never well developed early on. My favorite Khazar is when Bruce Jones scripted it, another 5 or 6 years later. So this page is of interest in why I raised my camera up a bit. And because I own the original art. I've showed this on some other people's channels, but never on my channel. I picked it up a few months ago. So one of my favorite acquisitions of the year, to own my own Alfredo Alcala inked page by John Buscema. It does not have Khazar in the picture, but still, that doesn't matter to me. It's just an amazing page. But you may notice it's on a single comic book art page. This is the size of a comic book art page, but it's been split down the middle to do 2 pages. And I read somewhere that there was a brief period at Marvel where they would turn 2 pages into one in each issue. Sorry, you turn 1 page into 2 pages in each issue to save money. And I've noticed in other comics that there'll be this odd, badly drawn, kind of blown up panel done as a double page spread in some of these. But in this case, Buscema drew actual panels. There's instructions on the top to the inker. Ink these panels very tightly. Letter copy on a separate sheet. So they did the lettering on a separate sheet at the proper size, and then pasted it down so that when it reproduces, the lettering would look normal. So, to me, a fascinating little bit of comic book history. All of this looks to me better in black and white. The colorist did a fine job in this issue, whoever that colorist was. But Alfredo Alcala's inks were just born to be viewed in black and white. Or perhaps in a larger size. Maybe if this is in an omnibus somewhere or a larger edition, that would look cool. Yeah. So I knew I owned this issue, but I had never read it when I bought it. I just saw Buscema and Alfredo Alcala, and I put in a bid that I could afford or that I was willing to pay. So, and of course, Khazar saves everybody, and it looks like we're going to have more adventures between Khazar and this young gentleman. I'd be curious to see if I can dig up the next issue if I own it. I think I own it. I own a lot of Khazar, and I've been collecting Khazar the past 3 or 4 years, just grabbing it whenever I see it cheaply. So I need to double check all that I own, but it probably seems like a good chance I own. I wonder if this art team stayed on, and if this plot style continued. Conan was really booming by 1974, so I can see why they would want to kind of attract the same audience, because there's obvious parallels between the 2 characters. Okay, let me lower this back down a little bit. Finally, my final little thing to talk your ear off about is this Kamandi issue 2, The Last Boy on Earth. It is funny, with The Last Boy on Earth, we right away meet young men humans. I don't think Kirby ever spells it out, but in my mind, they're post-humans. They're not real humans in the way Kamandi is. These are those rats. They all seem to wear masks and stuff. They just are very elaborate. And but they are thieves. They thieve from other people, and they sort of have an underground existence which parallels the rats in Kirby's 1957 story from Startling Tales or Disturbing Tales. We'll see what that is. But here one of the cool things about this issue is we learn what Ben Boxer can do. Or did we learn that in the first issue also? Now I'm not sure. But as a kid, I always wanted more of Ben Boxer and his companions because they were superheroes, essentially. But I think Kirby didn't want to emphasize the superheroes in this story. But anyway, visually, I mean, this just looks incredible. And then we get into a submarine and take an underwater tour of sunken New York and encounter a rat scuba diver. That just looks really cool. And the electrically charged traps that rats use to capture humans. It's just a lot of wonderful detail. And it's a very enjoyable read. But as I said, not anywhere near, in my mind, one of the top Kirby issues. I think he did a brilliant job setting things up in issue 1. And now he's he's now setting the story pattern that he wants to set into motion of Kamandi going from one place to another and encountering different societies. So the interest level is gonna vary depending on what society he goes to. But this issue, oh, look, now was that a printing error or did some kid spill ink in this copy? I think I have other copies of this issue. Kamandi is something that I rescue copies when I find them. So at the end of this, he goes off with Ben Boxer and his 3 companions, and they're heading to the tracking site. But I know that in pretty short order he gets separated from them, but I just can't remember how. And it's kind of, I mean, it's nice. It's kind of weird how Kamandi has this ongoing cast of characters, but is also always traveling around and always being separated from them. But I guess that's, as a kid, I wanted Kamandi to have a happier life and be with his friends more often. That's the feeling I got here. This looks really cool. Is that Mike Kaluta art there? I really want to hunt down that shadow. I wonder if they published it in black and white. Probably not. Maybe they were thinking of it at some point. And here is Kirby talking about cataclysms and how they happen to Earth about every 10,000 or 20,000 years. And does the Earth flip its lid every 10,000 years or thereabouts? Is planetary cataclysm part of some kind of continual adjustment Earth must make in its endless swing around the sun? Now, the Earth does wobble as it goes around the sun, so we get big weather changes every 10 or 20,000 years. And, that's why we had the last ice age. And, of course, there are other disasters that can come to us from outer space, too, like extinction events when giant comets hit the Earth. Hopefully, NASA is working hard. I know NASA is working hard on protecting us from those events. Hopefully, that succeeds. But at the beginning, because we were talking on that other show I was on about that I had remembered it being like a nuclear accident that caused Kamandi's world, but Roger pointed out that it wasn't. And really right here he says, somewhere in the past, a natural catastrophe of cataclysmic proportion had exposed the planet to an unknown period of intense radiation. So that kind of creates confusion with the radiation, but he may mean radiation from outer space or something, who knows. I don't know if he explored that again or some more. Anyway, very cool. I'll be reading Kamandi number 3 tonight. So I think I'm going to flip the camera around one more time and just show you a few things. Actually, it's easier just to keep the camera turned away from my beautiful face. So let me show you a little haul along with when I picked up Sir Alfred. I also picked up a few other things at a store, Cosmic Monkey, not too far away. I think I went there about a week and a half ago. And so I I'm trying to get a complete run of Warlord from number 1 through 70, which I think is all the Warlord that Mike Grell was, or his wife, was involved in. So I had 3 left to go, and now I only have 1 left to go. Thanks to Nauman, who got me issue number 1. So this is issue number 56. So I paid $3 for this instead of the usual 50 cents because I hadn't found these in the 50-cent bin. And then the other issue is issue number 70. Maybe I'm going up higher than 70. Anyway, issue number 70. So I forget there's one other issue. I think it's in the 20s somewhere that I need. I'm sure I can find it easily. And then I will start on a Warlord reread or read. I probably, as a kid, never read the entirety of Warlord. And then the same shop had a 50% off shelf of trades, hard and soft. So I don't really know anything about this particular one, but its original price was $16, so for $8, and it's written by Jodorowsky, the well-known filmmaker who collaborated with Moebius on the Incal. This is number 4 of Sinner Saint. It looks like a Western of sorts, so I am looking forward to checking that out for the $8 I paid for it. The art looks very nice. The colors seem kind of monotonous a little bit, but and you know, my youthful dislike of comic book westerns has kind of worn away, and I'm more interested in them now. And it's doubly kind of weird when you get Europeans, although actually, where's Jodorowsky from? Is he from Mexico or somewhere else in Central America maybe? But now lives in Paris. But the European fascination with the Western is kind of fascinating in and of itself. And then I would probably prefer Superman cartoons from the 40s, but Batman cartoons from the 40s at half price on a book whose initial list price was, oh, it's not there, was $20. So this must be a very old hardback that's just been sitting in the store forever unsold. So for $10, a nice thick book full of nice reproductions of old Batman comics, I couldn't resist that. The paper's kind of glossy, which feels weird, but I do like the art style back then. I think what made Batman better over time was as his rogues gallery got better. I see the Joker here, so that's a good sign. Although current comics rely too heavily on the Joker. Batman, though, has this fantastic rogues gallery, so we'll see what else is there. You know, you can see when you look at it in comic strip form how much of an influence on early comic book artists must have been Milton Caniff. It just feels like it's trying to be like Milton Caniff to a large degree. Now, it's getting maybe a little more stylized going further on, I'm not sure. Well, still kind of a Milton Caniff-y thing, with a few other looks inside. So I don't know how much of this I'll read or when I'll read it, but I just couldn't resist. I just couldn't resist. Maybe that will be on my tombstone. With a picture of a pile of comics, too. Okay, this was a long one. For those of you who made it all the way through, I really appreciate you, and I will talk to you about comics again soon.